Sir, this area is for active personnel only. The observation gallery is upstairs, behind the reinforced glass, where you belong. The voice was sharp, a finely honed instrument of institutional arrogance. Instructor Kalen Vance, a man sculpted by protein shakes and a profound sense of self-importance, stood with his arms crossed, his tactical vest straining against a chest puffed with authority. He was addressing the old man who stood near the entrance to the firing range, a place of sacred noise and precision. The old man was a specter of another time, dressed in a simple worn jacket and faded denim, his face a roadmap of wrinkles carved by sun and worry. He said nothing, his gaze sweeping over the array of advanced weaponry laid out on the benches, his eyes a pale, washed-out blue that seemed to absorb the light without reflecting it. His stillness was an affront to the range's dynamic energy, an anchor of unwanted silence in a sea of controlled chaos. Kalen's jaw tightened. Disrespect, especially the quiet, unassuming kind, was a thing he could not tolerate. It was a challenge to the natural order he enforced. Did you hear me, old-timer? This isn't a museum. We're training the next generation of warfighters here. It's a little loud for your afternoon nap. A few of the younger trainees, eager to curry favor, snickered. The old man's grandson, Private Miller, rushed over, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and filial duty. Instructor Vance, I'm sorry. This is my grandfather, Silas. He just wanted to see where I train. We were just leaving. Silas placed a gentle, steadying hand on his grandson's arm, a gesture that was both calming and resolute. His eyes finally settled on Kalen, and for a moment, the instructor felt an unnerving sensation, as if he were the one being assessed, measured, and found wanting. Silas's gaze was not hostile, not even judgmental. It was something far more disconcerting. It was patient. He seemed to be waiting for something, though Kalen couldn't imagine what. The old man's presence was a quiet hum beneath the loud crackle of the facility, a dissonance that grated on the instructor's perfectly ordered world. He was an anomaly, a variable that didn't fit the equation of modern warfare as Kalen understood it. The centerpiece of the day's training was the new XM-2040 Extreme Long-Range Tactical Rifle, a marvel of engineering design to make the impossible possible. The challenge, a publicity stunt concocted by the base commander to showcase their cutting-edge capabilities, was a single shot at a target 5,000 meters away. It was a ludicrous distance, a feat that bordered on meteorological prayer rather than pure marksmanship. The integrated ballistics computer did most of the work, calculating for windage, Coriolis effect, temperature, and even the subtle curvature of the Earth, yet the human element remained the final, fallible variable. One by one, the top snipers in the program tried and failed. Their shots, guided by millions of dollars of technology, went wide, falling short or drifting maddeningly off target. The digital display showed misses measured not in inches, but in feet. Kalen paced behind them, his critiques a venomous stream of condescension. You're fighting the rifle, people. Trust the tech. This isn't some ancient art form. He shot a pointed look towards Silas, who now stood silently by a concrete support pillar, his posture as unyielding as the pillar itself. Back in the old days, Kalen announced to the room, his voice dripping with disdain. They thought hitting a man at 1,000 yards was the work of a god. Now we have computers that can calculate the sneeze of a butterfly in the next county, and you still can't land a round. It proves that the old ways are obsolete. The warrior of today is an extension of his technology. His words were meant to inspire his students and, more importantly, to belittle the silent old man. He wanted to see a flicker of indignation, a defensive retort, something to confirm his own superiority. But Silas offered nothing. He simply watched, his expression unchanging, as another high-velocity round missed its distant mark. A younger trainee, a quiet observer named Diaz, found his eyes drawn not to the failed shots, but to Silas. He noticed a small, tarnished pin on the old man's jacket collar. It wasn't a standard military insignia, he recognized. It was a simple silver star, partially obscured by a stylized, almost ethereal wisp of cloud. It was subtle, forgotten, yet it held a strange gravity. The failures mounted, and with them, Kalen's frustration grew into theatrical fury. He berated his top marksman, a cocky sergeant who had just missed by nearly 10 feet. 10 feet. Are you aiming for the target or the continent it's on? My grandmother could get closer by throwing the bullet. The sergeant shrank under the verbal assault, his confidence shattered. The entire hangar-like room was thick with tension and the bitter smell of failure. It was then that Private Miller, Silas's grandson, seeing his grandfather endure the relentless, indirect mockery, felt a surge of protective pride that overpowered his training-induced timidity. The boy's voice, though trembling, cut through Kalen's tirade. My grandfather could make that shot. The silence that followed was absolute, a sudden vacuum where the instructor's rage had been. Every head turned, first to the young private, then to the old man he had championed. Kalen's face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, disbelief, and finally, a cruel, delighted amusement. A low, rumbling laugh started deep in his chest. Your grandfather? He gestured dramatically at Silas. Him? Private, I appreciate the family loyalty, but we're operating in the real world here. Look at his hands. He's got the shakes. He probably thinks a scope is something you use to gargle. The other instructors joined in the laughter, a chorus of derision that echoed off the high ceiling. The humiliation was complete, a spotlight of shame shining down on the boy and his grandfather. Miller's face was beet red. He wanted the concrete floor to swallow him whole. He started to stammer an apology, to retract the impossible claim, but Kalen held up a hand, silencing him. The instructor's eyes glittered with a predatory light. He saw a chance to teach a lesson no one would ever forget, to crush this absurd challenge and re-establish his dominance in the most definitive way possible. He would make an example of the old man. No, Private. Let's not be hasty, Kalen said, his voice smooth and dangerous. Your grandfather deserves a chance to defend his honor, doesn't he? He turned his full attention to Silas, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. What do you say, old-timer? You heard the boy. The range is yours. One shot. That's all we need to see. Prove the old ways aren't dead after all. He walked over to the XM 2040, patting its carbon fiber stock with mock reverence. Don't worry, we'll help you get settled. Wouldn't want you to strain anything. The offer was a trap, a public execution of dignity. To refuse would be to admit defeat, to validate every condescending word. To accept was to invite certain failure and even greater ridicule. The trainees watched, their faces a mixture of pity for the old man and morbid excitement. Miller looked at his grandfather, his eyes pleading, silently begging him to walk away. But Silas's gaze was fixed on the rifle. The sounds of the range, the laughter, the whispers, they all seemed to fade into a distant hum. For the first time since arriving, Silas moved with purpose, taking a slow step forward. His voice, when it came, was quiet, yet it carried the weight of an oath across the silent room. I will. 2 words. They were not a boast, not a threat. They were a simple statement of fact, a promise made to himself decades ago in a place much colder than this. The crisis was now set in stone. The frail-looking veteran, armed with nothing but a lifetime of secrets, walked toward the firing line to face a challenge designed to break the best modern soldiers, his every step measured against the rising tide of mockery and disbelief. He was a ghost walking into the machine, and the whole world was watching. As Silas approached the firing station, the air around him seemed to change. The ambient noise of fans and computer terminals felt distant. He laid his hands on the rifle, and the cold, modern composite of its frame felt alien, a stark contrast to the worn wood and oiled steel he knew in his soul. He closed his eyes, not to block out the stares of the young soldiers, but to open a door within himself. The scent of burnt powder and ozone in the air was the key. It was a smell that transcended time, a perfume of memory. Instantly, he was no longer in a climate-controlled training facility in Texas. He was on a windswept ridge in the chosen reservoir, the cold so profound it felt like a living entity, stealing the breath from his lungs and the warmth from his blood. The year was 1950. He wasn't holding a 15-pound tactical marvel. He was cradling a heavy, modified M1 Garand, its action stiff with frost. There was no digital scope, no atmospheric sensor array. There was only him, his iron sights, and the whisper of the wind, a wind that spoke of snow, death, and the enemy moving in the valley below. He remembered the feeling of his own breath freezing on his scarf, the numb ache in his fingers, the impossible weight of the decision he had to make. A single shot to stop a A shot that no manual said was possible, a shot his commanding officer had forbidden him to take. But he had seen the calculation in his mind's eye, a pure, intuitive understanding of physics and fate. He remembered the pull of the trigger, the violent kick against his shoulder, and the long, agonizing silence before a distant puff of red in the snow confirmed the impossible. That moment, that feeling, was his true north. Opening his eyes, Silas looked at the XM2040 not as a tool, but as a medium. He ignored the glowing console, the myriad of data points flashing across the screen. His fingers, which Kalen had mocked as shaky, moved with a surgeon's precision, not to input data, but to feel the machine. He ran his thumb over the trigger guard, tapped the stock, listening to the resonance. He was communing with the rifle, learning its language in seconds. Kalen, impatient and eager for the humiliation to begin, strode over and tapped the large stopwatch display. "The clock is running, Pops. You've got 1 minute. Starting now." The countdown began. 60, 59, 58. Silas slid into position behind the rifle, his body folding into the prone stance with a practiced fluidity that belied his age. It was a movement as natural to him as breathing, a posture his muscles had held for countless hours in forgotten hells. His grandson watched, his heart pounding with a painful mix of hope and fear. Kalen stood with his arms crossed, a smirk fixed on his face, waiting for the inevitable, comical failure. But Silas wasn't looking through the main eyepiece of the advanced digital scope. Instead, he had his eye pressed against a small, secondary optical port, a manual override sight almost no one ever used. His right hand wasn't on the trigger, but on the manual elevation and windage knobs, making infinitesimal adjustments. He turned them not to match the computer's suggestions, but against them. He was listening to that other wind, the one from his memory, the one that taught him secrets of air and gravity that no algorithm could truly comprehend. He felt the subtle vibration of the building, the slight shift in air pressure as the ventilation system kicked on. Across the room, the trainee Diaz had finally found a match for the strange pin. His phone displayed a grainy, declassified document. Unit 734, Ghosts of Chosen, Special Operations Reconnaissance and Elimination. Most of the file was redacted, but one line was clear. Experts in intuitive, long-range interdiction beyond calculated limits. Diaz looked from his phone to the old man, his breath catching in his throat. He then saw it clearly, the faded tattoo on Silas's wrist, revealed as his sleeve slid back. It was a ghost, a whisper of ink, the mark of a specter. The timer flashed. 05, 04, 03. Silas let out a slow, steady breath, a wisp of vapor that seemed to carry all the weight of his years. At 02, the range was rocked by a single, deafening crack. The rifle had fired. The recoil, which had thrown younger, stronger men off balance, barely nudged his shoulder. He remained perfectly still, a statue of stone and memory, his eye still fixed on the scope long after the bullet had gone. Every eye in the room darted to the massive video screen that showed the target 5 kilometers away. For a second, there was nothing but the heat haze shimmering off the desert floor. Kalen's smirk widened. A clean miss. He opened his mouth to declare the farce over, to deliver the final, crushing punchline. But then, the image resolved. A small, black hole had appeared directly in the center of the target's head-sized bullseye. The system's sensors confirmed the hit, flashing bright green letters across the screen. Impact detected. Coordinates. 0, 0 below it. Another line appeared. New facility record. Shot timer. 582 seconds. The room plunged into a silence so profound it was almost violent. The sound of Kalen's jaw metaphorically hitting the floor was the only thing moving. His face, moments before a mask of smug superiority, was now a canvas of utter, slack-jawed disbelief. "No," he whispered, the sound pathetic. "No, that's not possible. It's a glitch. A fluke. Pure dumb luck." He began frantically tapping at the control console, trying to find an error in the system, a bug that could explain away the miracle that had just unfolded. It was at that precise moment of denial that the sharp screech of tires echoed from outside, a sound that cut through the stunned atmosphere. 2 black, government-issue SUVs, lights flashing, roared to a stop just outside the main bay doors. The doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. and out stepped a man who radiated an aura of absolute command. He wore the uniform of a four-star general, his chest a constellation of ribbons, his face set like granite. He wasn't there for a tour. He was there on a mission, and his eyes scanned the room with a fury that made even Kalen's earlier tirade seem like a child's tantrum. The general's gaze swept past the instructors, past the trainees, and locked onto the old man slowly rising from the firing mat. He strode forward, his polished boots clicking on the concrete, his two aides struggling to keep pace. He ignored Kalen completely, walking right past him as if he were a piece of furniture, and came to a stop directly in front of Silas. The general, a man who commanded armies and whispered in the ears of presidents, drew himself up to his full height. In a motion so sharp and precise it seemed to cut the air, he rendered a perfect salute. It was not the casual gesture of a superior to a subordinate. It was the deep, reverent salute of a soldier to a monument. Master Sergeant Thorne. The general's voice boomed, filled with a respect that bordered on awe. I apologize for my tardiness. We were alerted you were on base, but I didn't get here in time to prevent. This, he let the word hang in the air, a clear indictment of the scene he had walked into. He then turned, his gaze falling upon Kalen with the force of a physical blow. The instructor flinched, his face paling to a sickly white. Instructor Vance. The general's voice dropped to a lethally cold temperature. Do you have any idea who this is? Do you read history? Or do you just polish your ego all day? Without waiting for an answer, he began to speak, his voice a formal citation of honor. Let me educate you. You see the pin on his collar? That is the mark of the Ghosts of Chosen, a unit so classified your security clearance is a child's library card by comparison. These men wrote the doctrine on extreme-range warfare in conditions that would make you weep. They did it with iron sights and frozen fingers while your grandfather was still learning to walk. He pointed to Silas's wrist. And that tattoo, that marks him as a specter, the best of the best in a unit comprised entirely of legends. We are standing in the presence of Master Sergeant Silas Thorne, the man who held off an entire platoon single-handedly on Hill 1221 for 72 hours. The man whose field calculations on wind deviation and spin drift became the foundation for the very software in that rifle you cherish so much. He didn't need your computer, instructor. Your computer needs him. The general took a breath, his righteous anger filling the room. His longest confirmed kill was made with a rifle that belongs in a museum, in a blizzard, at a distance we never officially published because no one at the Pentagon would believe it was possible. You didn't just disrespect an old man. You desecrated a living piece of American history. The weight of the general's words settled over the room, crushing Kalen beneath their historical significance. The trainees stared at Silas, no longer seeing a frail old man, but a titan from a bygone era of heroism they could barely comprehend. Kalen stood frozen, his world dismantled in under a minute. His authority, his expertise, his entire sense of self, all of it had been a sham, an illusion shattered by a single bullet and the quiet man who fired it. His career was over. He knew it with a sickening certainty. The general was not finished with him. You will render a formal, public apology to Master Sergeant Thorne. Now, then you will pack your desk. Your new assignment is effective immediately. You'll be teaching recruits at Fort Polk the proper way to sanitize a latrine. Perhaps a little humility is a lesson you can still manage to learn. Trembling, his face a mess of shame and terror, Kalen stumbled forward. He stood before Silas, unable to meet the old man's calm, blue eyes. He mumbled a pathetic, disjointed apology, the words catching in his throat. Master Sergeant. I had no idea. I am so sorry. Sir, he was a broken man, stripped bare in front of his students. Just as he was about to turn away and accept his fate, Silas did something no one expected. He reached out and placed a hand on Kalen's shoulder. The touch was light, but it stopped the instructor in his tracks. For the first time since his single-word acceptance of the challenge, Silas spoke again. His voice was soft, devoid of anger or triumph. It was the voice of a man who had seen too much to hold on to grudges. Respect is a heavier burden than a rifle, son, Silas said gently. Learn to carry it properly. It was not a condemnation, but a final, profound lesson. It was an act of grace, a forgiveness that was more humbling than any punishment the general could devise. Kalen finally looked up, his eyes filled with tears, and saw not a vanquisher, but a teacher. The lesson had been delivered. The general personally escorted Silas and his grandson toward the exit. As they walked, a sound began to ripple through the cavernous space. It was the sound of a single trainee, Diaz, snapping to attention. Then another, and another. In a wave of spontaneous, heartfelt reverence, every single trainee in the room rose to their feet, their bodies rigid, their hands raised in a salute to the quiet legend who had walked among them. It was a tribute more powerful than any medal, a recognition of true greatness that transcended rank and time. Kalen remained where he was, a solitary, diminished figure in the center of the room he once commanded. He watched them leave, the image of Silas's calm, forgiving face burned into his memory. He looked up at the giant screen, where the impossible shot was still displayed, a perfect hole in the center of a distant target. It was a monument not to technology, but to the enduring power of the human spirit, to the quiet professionals whose sacrifices formed the bedrock of the very institution he had disgraced. The echo of the rifle shot had faded, but the echo of Silas's words about the weight of respect would resonate within him for the rest of his life. He finally understood. The most dangerous weapon on any battlefield isn't the rifle, it's the man behind it. And the greatest of those men often make no sound at all until the moment history demands it. He had been loud, and Silas had been quiet. And in the end, the silence had proven to be infinitely more powerful. The old ways were not dead. They were just waiting, patiently, for the arrogant and the ignorant to be reminded of their place.